Hello, Orchard Archivers. Thanks for tuning in to yet another episode of the Caramel Apples Podcast. I'm Kennedy Rizzo,
And I'm Cooper Lee.
and this week we have quite the retro treat for you. We're going to engage in a fascinating discussion about the iconic Hollywood producer, director, John Hughes. Are you ready to trek retro? Coop, we have yet another interesting Orchard Trek retro to embark on this week.
Mm-hmm.
We're always most happy and excited to embark on amazing retro topics, just about any and everything 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
But realistically, one can't talk about the 80s and not talk about the spot on portrayals of school life and culture of the 80s better than through the vision of John Hughes.
Oh my goodness, yes. John Hughes' films were quite iconic indeed.
Yeah.
Like if someone cold asked you to describe how school life, the culture was back in the day, you may be able to describe it successfully.
Right.
But I'd wager to just throw in one of old John Hughes' movies. Try that again. Movies, and you're looking at the perfect definition of school life. Young love and turmoil we actually experienced back in the 80s.
Yeah.
But keep your retro ears out for a twist on that notion, so stay tuned.
Ooh, a bit of mystery and intrigue, I see. Well, let's jump right in. Let's turn up our nostalgia dial, shall we?
Yes.
Okay, so John Hughes is one of the most influential personas in the realm and history of cinema. He's one of Hollywood's most well-known producers and directors with that signature slant, pinpointed vision that easily detected. And he has a massive number of commercially acclaimed credits to his name.
So sounds good so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and John Hughes was an American film director, film producer, and screenwriter. He was credited for creating some of the most memorable comedy films of the 80s and 90s when he was at the height of his career. He had a talent for writing coming of age stories and for depicting fairly realistic adolescent characters.
Now, I wonder where exactly did his brilliant inspiration come from?
Yeah.
Well, first, let's dive into some of John Hughes's early history and personal experience, and we might be able to piece together what may have inspired so much of his future infamous projects.
Love some backstory, right?
Oh, yeah.
Gimme. Some deep backstory totally sweetened our treks, that's for certain.
Oh, yeah.
So on February 18th of 1950, John Wyden Hughes Jr. was born in Lansing, Michigan. The city's main employer for much of the 20th century were manufacturing plants for automobiles. Lansing housed the headquarters of companies such as Oldsmobile and the REO Motor Car Company. Hughes' father, John Hughes Sr., was a salesman, while Hughes's mother, Marion Crawford, worked as a volunteer for charity organizations.
Okay.
And it sounds like a pretty normal run-of-the-mill scenario, right?
Oh, yeah. John Hughes had 3 sisters and no brothers. Fortunate guy. I'm just kidding. Our younger brother wouldn't agree, would he?
Yeah, right.
He'd be like, sisters suck. No, we love our little bro. Anyway. But back to John Hughes. His family moved often. So for most of his childhood, the Hughes family lived in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, a commuter suburb of Metro Detroit. So, according to an interview of Hughes, he was the only boy in his neighborhood while growing up.
Wow.
Yeah, poor guy.
Yes.
He was surrounded by girls and old people. And nothing wrong with old people. We love them.
Yeah, yeah, right.
But there was no boys around for him to be friends. So that was probably pretty tough.
So
Yeah.
now, even though his life so far sounds pretty normal and benign, except for his surroundings, apparently, but we're already seeing how a few things he dealt with in life was shaping his perspective on how he took in and made sense of the people and world around him.
Mm-hmm.
He spent a lot of time alone and used his active imagination to keep himself entertained.
Well, in 1963, the Hughes family moved to Northbrook, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. John Hughes attended first the Grove Middle School and then the Glenbrook North High School. His high school experiences reportedly provided inspiration for his teen themed films of his career.
Well, there it is.
There it is. According to interviews with Hughes's friends, Hughes had a poor relationship with his parents who often criticized him.
Hate hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tragedy in itself right there. But as we've said, he's putting his personal life troubles to good use.
Yeah.
You got lemons and make lemonade.
There you go.
Understandably, as an adolescent, John Hughes felt the need to escape his problems. He became an avid film fan. Yes, we can completely understand that.
Totally.
And as he found that film satisfied his need for escapism, he was a fan of both the Rat Pack, the informal group of actors and singers,
Oh boy.
and the music group, the Beatles. I guess a good bit of folks out there are aware of who was a part of the original Rat Pack,
Mm-hmm.
but since they were way ahead of our time, we'll go ahead and share. Which will again paint the pull or draw John Hughes had to eventually add to his creative works.
Mm.
Fun fact, the original Rat Pack consisted of Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford.
Wait, what? Peter Lawford was part of the Rat Pack?
Yeah.
Did not know that. Coop, that's Lori from Little Women, right?
Oh my God. Yes. Okay.
Yes, and I just love Frank Sinatra as well. Goodness, you want to talk about some mad inspiration?
Yes. Nailed it.
Oh gosh, yes. So there's an interesting connection that John Hughes comes up with closely related to the whole Rat Pack label. Coming right up, so stay tuned.
That's right. Stay tuned, listeners. Things are starting to heat up in regard to our Orchard Trek Retro this week.
Yes.
Okay, moving forward. After graduating high school, John Hughes enrolled in the University of Arizona, but eventually dropped out of the university and tried to make a living as a comedy writer. He wrote jokes for professional comedians such as Rodney Dangerfield.
Oh, God.
Who was born in 1921 to 2004.
Okay.
And Joan Rivers, born in 1933, died in 2014. And 1970, Hughes was hired by the advertising company Needham Harp and Sears. 1925 to 1986.
Okay.
And that same year, Hughes married his former high school classmate, Nancy Ludwig. John Hughes worked in the advertising industry for several years. And in 1974, Hughes was hired by the advertising agency Leo Burnett Worldwide. And this company's most notable clients included the Pillsbury Company, Starkist, Heinz, Green Giant, and Philip Morris.
Interesting, Coop. On that note, and continuing to move forward on into his climbing career as a marketing agent, John Hughes was assigned to handle Virginia Slims, which is a brand of cigarettes produced by Philip Morris.
Yes.
So the assignment required him to regularly travel to New York City, NYC. Yes, we need to do a whole thing on that, right?
Yes.
But New York City was where Philip Morris's headquarters were located.
So fun fact, John Hughes took the opportunity to visit the offices of the popular humor magazine National Lampoon from 1970 to 1998 in New York City. And he successfully negotiated a new position as a regular contributor to the magazine. Hughes reportedly impressed the magazine's editor by producing quality work at a fast pace. They always like the efficiency. If you can get things done quickly and it's in good quality, you're probably a shoo-in.
Oh yeah, totally.
And among his first short stories was Vacation 58, and that was based on his recollections of his family vacations during his childhood. Some nostalgia for you. The story was eventually adapted into the road comedy film National Lampoon's Vacation from 1983.
Oh, okay. That's sounding familiar when referencing National Lampoons. that movie's nutty.
Oh my God.
National Lampoon co-produced films written by their staff writers. John Hughes provided the script for the black comedy National Lampoon's Class Reunion that came out in 1982. And that was depicting a serial killer who targets his former classmates.
Oh boy.
Well, obviously here, listen to this. The film was poorly received. Yeah, it underperformed at the box office. So, yeah, I think others felt the same way. But here's the kicker. It inspired John Hughes to try to make a career as a screenwriter.
See, you wonder what catapults people into the directions that they go.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. Okay, so now we're talking, right?
Yes.
So John Hughes subsequently wrote the scripts for both National Lampoon's Vacation in 1983 and Mr. Mom in 1983, comedy films which were box office hits.
Oh my, both of those are great films.
Right. And he then signed a contract for 3 films with the studio Universal Pictures.
Okay.
He made his directing debut in the coming-of-age comedy film 16 Candles in 1984, and the film depicted the misadventures of high school sophomore Samantha Sam Baker, played by Molly Ringwald.
Okay.
It performed well at the box office, which was bravo, and was well received by critics. 16 Candles is quite synonymous to the retro rockin' 80s.
Well, with these early but pivotal films he secured under his belt so far, it was quite evident that John Hughes had quickly established himself as a leading director of teen films.
And his brilliant portrayal of young love, high school life, and culture was played out so well in his films, like The Breakfast Club from 1985, Weird Science 1985, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off 1986. These are considered classics of that genre, right?
Hands down.
Yeah. And I think these coming of age movies were key in helping throngs of youth coming up back at that time and dealing with these similar themes and issues common to that demographic is what makes John Hughes movies so incredibly nostalgic.
Oh, much agreed, Coop. I'm sure those titles and many others he's done were lifelines for coming of age youth back then.
Sure.
But John Hughes decided to switch gears in regards to his creativity in order to cover new ground. So he then directed Planes, Trains, and Automobiles from 1987. And that featured a duo of adult protagonists. So, as many are well familiar with, the stars of the film were experienced comic actors Steve Martin and John Candy.
Not surprisingly, the film was a hit.
Oh, yeah.
More importantly, John Hughes and John Candy became close friends.
John and John, the two Johns.
They would often work together in subsequent films.
Now, this movie I remember well, and I believe we saw it on VHS tape. Yeah, dated. But I think we rented this from our local video store. And John Hughes' next film as a director was, okay, remember this one, Coop? She's Having a Baby.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, from 1988.
Yeah.
So this was about the life of a newlywed couple. I guess, like their little adventures or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I personally didn't realize that this film was one of his works.
Okay.
I mean, we just sat back and enjoyed a good flick. And, this showcased the acting chops of Elizabeth McGovern and Kevin Bacon. So this was a good movie. But unfortunately, the film fared poorly financially and was considered rather blasé by the critics.
Critics.
Yeah.
I tell you, I remember that movie too, and I do think it was good.
It was.
It was entertaining, and of course, now you have the 6-degree connection for John Hughes and Kevin Bacon.
That's an interesting topic too.
I know, it's insane.
It is.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah.
Let's see these so-called critics' craft, Put something together to wide release and acclaim.
Yeah, try that, people.
Yeah. Everyone's a critic, aren't they?
Yeah.
And sometimes those opinions are spot on. But it's really hard to poo-poo on any given retro offering of John Hughes.
Yeah, try it and die. I'm just kidding.
Kenneth has spoken. And I was going to mention this earlier, but we got busy building momentum to John Hughes' career. But I have a fun fact to share that is pretty cool. This, in essence, is for our Henri Mama.
Oh, boy.
But fun fact, John Hughes is probably sporting the maiden surname of our mama. Hughes was her maiden name.
Ew, Mom. Yes, and she's quite proud of that name, too.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big thing for our mama. Good name. So, since Mom would find that crazy, cool. Maybe this is her episode. I don't know. Thanks, Coop, for including that fun fact just for her. So back to this cool connection with the other John Candy. John Hughes made a comeback with the film Uncle Buck from 1989. And Uncle Buck was a story about a lifelong bachelor who has to take care of his 2 nieces and a nephew. Was this a horror flick? I'm just playing. Sounds like fun. Not.
Right.
But the best part was that the film was a box office hit, earning about $80 million at the box office.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now we've come to the border of our decade travel parameters, but there are some things to further make note of concerning John Hughes's media career, even into the 90s.
Okay.
John Hughes's final film as a director was the comedy drama Curly Sue in 1991 about homeless con artist Bill Dancer, played by Jim Belushi, who desperately tries to keep the custody of his surrogate daughter. While moderately successful at the box office, the film was widely ridiculed by being overly sentimental.
Uh-oh.
Oh, yeah. Goodness gracious. There's those critics once again.
You're correct. Yes.
One can never make them happy.
Seems like. So, do you recognize any of these following films? In the 90s, John Hughes found success as a screenwriter, scripting several box office hits. Among his most notable films in this period were Home Alone.
Wow.
Yeah, from 1990, and Beethoven from 1992. I love that movie. It was cute.
Oh,
Uh, Both of these films starting a lucrative media franchise. So the first one, Home Alone, we always talk about our girl squad.
yes.
And our cousins are in there. And one of our cousins, she loved Home Alone.
Yes, she did.
Like, she loved Home Alone.
I don't remember. Did she love all of them, or was it mainly just the first one?
I think it was just the first one. I think she saw them all, but like that, the first one, I think she saw it multiple times. I'll have to ask her. Yeah, I'll see what she says. She'll be like, start going off about it. Ba-twing! Yes, she was an avid fan.
So, you want to hear a little history surrounding the making of Home Alone?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Fun fact. Did you know that by the 1990s that John Hughes shunned publicity completely, withdrawing from public life?
Really?
Yeah. And when casting the role of Kevin McAllister in Home Alone in 1990, Chris Columbus had already seen Macaulay Culkin and Uncle Buck from '89, but he wanted to audition some other kids, while John Hughes had his heart set on Culkin.
Mm.
So Columbus met Culkin in New York and was very charmed by him and thought he was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun fact. Chris Columbus auditioned 5 other kids and none of them shaped up to Culkin.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, Columbus went with Culkin because he was not as picture perfect and he had an instant relatability to the kids in the audience. Me thinks he was onto something.
Me thinks you're right. Chris Columbus knew the cameras would love him, and he was immensely funny. Chris Columbus was sent 2 scripts by John Hughes while he was staying with his wife's parents in Chicago after the birth of their first child. So one was for Home Alone, what we just discussed in 1990. So Columbus fell in love with it, and it really struck a chord with him. And he felt that he could make a really strong film out of it. So he and Hughes hit it off instantly. So Hughes gave him the job to direct.
Nice.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting because John Hughes, he's rolling into another facet of his career.
Yeah.
So John Hughes also wrote the scripts of the sequels Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, that came out in 1992, and Home Alone 3, that came out in 97.
Okay.
So he also scripted a notable comic strip adaptation, Dennis the Menace, from 1993. Dennis the Menace was cute.
It was cute.
It was based on the long running comic strip Dennis the Menace that I think began like around 1951.
Ooh, that's some longevity.
Yeah, by Hank Ketchum. And I don't care who you are, Dennis the Menace, starring Walter Matthau. Oh, he was Mr. Wilson. I'm sorry. This movie was hilarious.
It was such a cute and entertaining movie, so I totally agree with you. Chiclets, that's all I'm going to say.
That's it. Spoiler alert.
So, now back to some of the details contained in some of the iconic movies he showcased back within our designated decade parameters, aka the 80s. So it is in the details that we find many fascinating facts to pinpoint that just made his films pop.
Uh-huh.
Like, for instance, get this. Fun fact. Did you know that his movies often take place in Shermer, Illinois, or sets filmed in Chicago area?
Oh, neat.
Also, most of his teen movies from the 1980s have a scene in the school lunchroom, school library, or both.
Okay, and that is pretty cool because, like, that was the time we came up going to school, junior high, high school.
Uh-huh.
And I think a lot of these movies depicted what we experienced.
Yes.
So I don't know. I think that's awesome. Like, if you want, as we said at the beginning of our episode, if you want that perspective of what high school or young life was back then, just put in one of his movies. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Like, and going to the library,
Hmm.
that was something you actually look forward to doing in school. I mean, I don't know. You could take a Polaroid of school back then, and yes, he completely had it come to life.
I agree. I agree.
So cool.
And I bet it's a lot different now. And we don't have children, but I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think we have to. Like, school was a culture back then.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel the same. It just, I don't
No.
know.
Yeah. I think if we even tried to go there, we'd probably be very disappointed. Like, you'd feel sorry for the kids. Like, oh, you missed out. School, yeah, we didn't really like it, but it's like you missed out because it did have a certain feel surrounding school.
It was its own world.
It was.
Yeah, the parents were the fuddy duddies. They were outside doing their thing. And that was our world. Like, that was your world, and you could do it. Was like whatever you wanted, your own sitcom, your own movie, whatever you want to call it, like his movies.
Yes.
He also was notorious for putting in his films, like having close-ups of two characters locking eyes with each other. Puppy love or whatever.
Yes.
But this really adds to the draw and mystique of what young love entailed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He also includes several references to art or characters discussing art or posing to resemble works of art, too.
Okay.
And then more mainstays in his films, I mean, it's probably too many to actually list, but I mean, like, he honed in on what it was, visually honed in on what we experienced. I love it.
Yeah. Classic.
Oh, and there's one more thing. Yeah, that's classic in his movies is that he always has them end in a freeze frame moment. Isn't that 80s, Coop?
Yes. Completely. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
And then he always has a character silently mimicking another character as a line is spoken. I think I remember that real well in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
That one was nuts. That movie.
Yeah, Matthew Broderick. What, Ferris? Like,
Yes.
he wasn't acting. That was him.
I know, right?
Yeah, he was Andre.
Oh my goodness. And then the whole principal and and the secretary. That was just.
Oh, okay. This is for the archiver. So there was a cameo of somebody very famous in that movie. He was in it for like a hot 5 minutes, maybe. But this was when Ferris's sister, played by oh goodness, what was her name from Dirty Dancing?
Jennifer Grey.
Thank you. Jennifer was not coming to my mind. It was not happening. I saw her face, but it wasn't coming. Yeah, Jennifer Grey. She was in the school office or whatever, and she crossed paths with this celebrity. So, do you remember who that was, archivers? It was pretty cool. And I think she got to kiss him even.
Ooh, nice job on the trivia.
Yeah, yeah, Ferris Bueller, classic.
Yes. Now, remember a little earlier, we briefly mentioned that John Hughes was an avid fan of the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, fun fact. As a fan of the Beatles, John Hughes frequently had characters in his movies sing Beatles songs. So we have Anthony Michael Hall, the geek, sings Hey Jude in 16 Candles.
Okay.
Which was from 1984. John Cryer played Ducky, sings Love in Pretty in Pink from 86. And Matthew Broderick, Ferris Bueller, sings Twist and Shout in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, also from 86. So, yeah, John Hughes often showcased characters who are either stuck in one place or traveling somewhere, and often has a scene-stealing and usually doting supporting character, which serves little use for the actual plot. For example, Long Duke Dong and 16 Candles, 1984, and Chet in Weird Science, 1985.
That's funny right there.
It is. It is also noted that John Hughes often cast members of the Brat Pack portrayal of yuppie life. Often has a character use the pejorative term four-flusher, a term originating in poker, which means one who bluffs or boasts.
Four-flusher. That's funny, Coop. Yeah, she is the poker nut. She's like, oh, really? Humble me?
Yes.
Well, the Brat Pack yuppie life portrayal was quite a nostalgic reference and experience that was readily showcased within John Hughes's films. So we had mentioned earlier that John Hughes, that he himself being an avid film fan, too found that film satisfied his need for escapism, which made him a huge fan of the Rat Pack. Mm-hmm. So true to bringing alive his dream and interpretation of his version of this, he brought about, instead of the Rat Pack, the Brat Pack, which was frequently seen and showcased within his films.
That's right. And Kennard. The Brat Pack ignited a pop culture firestorm on the big screen. Hardcore back in the 80s.
Oh, yes.
Undeniable.
Oh, yes.
And this really did become his signature, if you will. Synonymous to his nostalgic movie offerings. So the Brat Pack again was loosely patterned off his idols, the Rat Pack. The 80s version was a group of familiar young actors and actresses that ruled both the box office as well as pop culture at the time, as we've stated.
This movement was strong, man. And because teens back in the day so badly wanted to envision and be a part of this exclusive club. Like, this was a big deal back then.
Yeah. Let's briefly explain why that was and put this thought in sharper focus.
Okay.
Fun fact. The original 8 that made up the Brat Pack were as follows: Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Rob Lowe, Andrew McCarthy, Demi Moore, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, and Ali Sheedy. Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
Just hearing you belt out those names, Coop, is so incredibly nostalgic.
Yeah.
Collectively, this iconic group of actors made some of the most memorable films of the decade. We've mentioned a few of the movies previously starring the group, but a few of the key standout ones we recognize is 16 Candles, St. Elmo's Fire, and The Breakfast Club, which those last two entries made their debut in the year 1985. John Hughes inserting the Brat Pack in his coming-of-age films was sheer genius.
It was sheer genius. And you know what's crazy about it? Like, those two last entries, especially, like The Breakfast Club, you definitely hear the main song for that when you're listening to 80s retro radio stations.
You do.
Like, that is a staple song. You'll hear St. Elmo's Fire, too, from time to time. It's not played as much as the one from The Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
But that one, so as you said, it was like sheer genius all the way around. And it made it a hit. The movie was a hit. The music was a hit, which if you had the good privilege of coming up in the 80s, you well know that John Hughes' vision that played out on film very much embodied the 80s of excess and hopefulness. But get this, you might find this somewhat interesting. Fun fact, did you know that at times things weren't all smiles and roses between Mr. Hughes and his youthful crew?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Did you know that he at one point notoriously cut off contact with his favorite young performers? Molly Ringwald and Michael Anthony Hall after they rejected some of his scripts in the mid 80s.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
Well, some trouble in paradise, I see.
Uh-huh.
Well, this is just a side note and maybe of particular interest to our discussion, but I heard that in regards to the movie 16 Candles,
Uh-huh.
that there was a bit of a hiccup surrounding this film, in that actress Molly Ringwald agreed with the notion or idea that this movie glorified rape culture.
I think I heard that indicated too, unfortunately.
Yeah. Um, there were a couple of people that came forward back in the year 2018 stating although the 80s was truly a different time in our culture, the girls' testimony accused the guy of sexual assault. Ugh, and get this, four other women when this news came to light. So it wasn't just her saying this.
Hmm.
Now, I'm guessing this all happened back when these people were in high school and in, their freshman year of college.
Yeah.
So, because of this, these accusations have brought up questions about the culture towards women in the 80s and lasting trauma of sexual abuse.
Oh, that's a serious angle presented versus the carefree, memorable scenes that actually played out in 16 Candles.
Mm-hmm.
Where the perceived trouble was framed within the love story in the film.
Mm-hmm.
This all came about from a news article from a Constance Grady. And that's where Molly Ringwald became aware of that underlying issue and weighed in on the matter.
Okay.
Yeah, so this moved her to write an article of her experience in the height of the recent Me Too movement in order to dissect some of her most beloved films she worked on with John Hughes. And she highlighted both date rape and racial stereotypes that showed up in a lot of the 80s comedies.
Mm.
Upon reflecting of said films, she became troubled at some of the scenes questioned by her young daughter.
Okay, so like this is really kind of interesting because we always go on and on about nostalgia and warm
Mhm.
memories and feelings and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But like these people, they're more aware of that kind of stuff now. Like I don't know, I think I know I'm lazy about that. I see them like, oh yeah, this is all great. But not everybody has those type of memories, right?
Right.
It's different times now. So when people actually comb through situations, like you're looking at this movie and saying, "Oh my goodness, that's pretty. Whoa, whoa."
Yeah. Yeah.
And everything's PC, so somebody's gonna speak up. Not everybody's gonna be like us, like, "Oh, that's just cool." People are like, "Whoa, that's degrading women, and that's dangerous." And my young daughter's watching this, and yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a whole nother angle surrounding this. We don't want to make light of it.
Mm.
And we
Yeah.
don't want to get off track too much now, do we?
Right.
That's a whole nother beast. But I don't know. Despite the questions raised from this sensitive angle of the movie, it still actually performed well at the box office because it came out during that time and nobody was really thinking seriously about deep stuff like that.
Right. That was just over there. Yeah.
Yes. And it was
Mm-hmm.
actually well received by the critics at the time.
Hey.
But it's neat to hear about this experience of one of the honorary members of the Brat Pack. I mean, because Molly Ringwald, she was it back then. Like she was
She
80s.
was. She really was.
Yeah. So who stands out to you most of the eight of the Brat Pack, Coop?
That's a good question because you can look at it two different ways. Like you can look at it like, okay, who stands out because they're still around? You saw them, and they're still currently working, or you can look at it as this was pretty much their highlight, the height of their career, and this is pretty much where they stayed.
Mm-hmm.
So I would tend to look at it that way.
Okay.
And I would say Anthony Michael Hall because he may has been in something really since then, but he is 80s to me.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I see him, if I think of an 80s person in movies, he would be one that would come to mind.
That is interesting.
Oh, what about you?
Now, real quick about your choice. I mean, I
Yeah.
just saw he was in the newsfeed. He just had his first child.
What?
Well,
Like
I
what?
mean, his
What?
lady. Yeah, he's like 60. I think he's early 60s, like 61 or 2.
What?
Yeah, I think. I did believe that.
brave man.
I might have to check on he's up there.
Oh my goodness.
He just became a first-time dad, so I was like, okay.
Wow, and probably, some of these others are probably on to being great grandparents. That's insane.
And with the times we live in, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yes. Oh my God.
Now I like the one from Mannequin. Andrew McCarthy, yeah.
Ah, yes. That is such a good movie too. But yes, go ahead.
He, well, just like you see him in something, you're like, oh yeah. It just like he just fit with those times, and
Yeah.
I don't know, he was a Weekend at Bernie's, which was nuts. So yeah, I like Andrew McCarthy. He's pretty cool.
Yeah, and pretty much all of them, you can see them in various movies from John Hughes. Like,
yeah,
you've seen them.
Mm-hmm.
And they very much stood out. And I think that they really led to, as you said, the nostalgia of the school age kids. And like, you feel like you would see them walking down the hallway with you, right?
Yes.
To their lockers and things. So,
oh yeah.
It was a nice choice. The girls too, like Ali Sheedy, you literally, I don't know, I haven't heard of her in a long time.
No. Demi Moore, probably her the most because, Bruce Willis and being her ex and all that.
Ah, yes.
And Rob Lowe, he's still kind of around. You can see him and stuff.
Yeah.
But, and Emilio Estevez, him and Young Guns, that laugh, boy, oh, that was iconic.
Oh, Henri to boot.
He's nuts.
Yeah.
Oh, in a good way.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of him anyway. So getting back on track.
Yes, totally.
Another cool feature baked into John Hughes's movies is the fact that, the cars, the automobiles played a key place in those movies as well.
Okay, seems fairly natural coming from a guy who came up in and around Motor City.
Totally, Kennard. Automobiles played poignant, even character-defined roles in several of John Hughes's films. There's the bizarre station wagon, the family truckster, the National Lampoon's Vacation '83, the Rolls Royce and 16 Candles of 1984. Let's see, the various cars indicating the social status of the kids on detention in the Breakfast Club of 1985. Let's see, there was a BMW for the moneyed prom queen, and an SUV for the jock.
Well, ahead of their times, weren't they? Now SUVs are the thing.
Absolutely. And the Ferrari and Ferris Bueller's Day Off from
you can't forget that one.
Not at all. We wouldn't have a list otherwise, right?
No.
And the marathon car rental scene in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles in '87.
Okay, so a number of his movies have included a small scene after the credits. The 80s were just great.
Yes.
So it was this insightful and collective vision that made those good things pop.
Fun fact. Did you know that John Hughes has directed 2 films that have been selected for the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant? That being The Breakfast Club, 1985, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, 1986. It's of no secret that John Hughes has indeed established himself as a leading director of teen films.
And many of his films became mainstay classics of the genre. John Hughes' final film as a director was the comedy drama Curly Sue, 1991, about the homeless con artist Bill Dancer, played by the late Jim Belushi. No, he's still alive. This one's alive. Jim's alive, John's not. So sorry. But this is where he tries to keep custody of his surrogate daughter. So like this was, we're not gonna go like super duper into like things that they did into the 90s. We talked about Home Alone and Curly Sue, that kind of thing. So this just shows the range and scope and he still was doing things, but like the names of these films, and that's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
yeah.
It's mind-boggling, and obviously we can't find the words of how amazing his career has been.
Yes, that's true.
And I'm sure there's probably things about it that he'd be like, no, I would like to change this or that. But I think overall, he'd probably be pretty satisfied with it. You know,
I hope so.
it's pretty
Yeah.
cool. So, did you know that while he gave interviews by the 1990s, John Hughes about shunned publicity completely, withdrawing from public life?
That what you just stated may have been closely linked to his dear friendship with John Candy. Yeah, people who knew John Hughes will have stated that Candy's death in 1994 had devastated him and may have contributed to his seclusion. Actor Vince Vaughn, who was close friends of Hughes, told Vanity Fair magazine in 2010 that he talked a lot about how much he loved John Candy. If
Mm.
Candy had lived longer, I think John would have made more films as a director. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
Mm.
and death affects people anyway. But I mean, like when you have a connection like that and then lose somebody, like that could be pretty devastating.
Yeah, that's really sad.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still passionate about his craft. He still went on to do many more projects on into the 90s, although this tidbit is way outside of our decade parameters. Fun facts. It is noted that even in the 2000s, John Hughes only scripted three more films. The most notable among them, the romantic drama Made in Manhattan, 2002, a hit for protagonist Jennifer Lopez. It earned about 164 million.
No, that's pretty substantial amount.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say so.
Well, John Hughes said of himself, and I quote, "The only reason I got into movies was because I had no music talent." End quote. Well, this was a great development for the retro cinematic realm.
Absolutely, we're glad for it too. Well, there's much more decadent caramel tidbits we could share with you, archivers, on John Hughes' fascinating life and career. We've covered quite a bit in this week's Orchard Trek Retro. But in our closing thoughts, in August of 2009, John Hughes visited NYC with his wife.
Okay.
He wanted to visit one of his sons who lived there and to meet his new grandson. On a sad note, on August 6th, John Hughes suffered a heart attack while walking in Manhattan.
Oh.
He was transported to Roosevelt Hospital but died shortly after. He was 59 years old. John Hughes was buried in Lake Forest Cemetery, a rural cemetery located in Lake Forest, Illinois. He was survived by his wife, their two children, and several grandchildren.
Oh, how tragic.
Yeah.
Well, in connection to the time when John Hughes is notoriously cut off contact with a couple of his favorite young actors, that was Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall, after they rejected some of his scripts in the mid 80s, it is said that when he died in 2009, Hughes hadn't spoken to either of them in over 20 years.
That's correct. Get this. In a New York Times editorial about his death, Molly Ringwald wrote, "Most people who knew John knew that he was able to hold a grudge longer than anyone. His grudges were almost supernatural things,
Uh-oh.
enduring for years, even decades." End quote.
Very interesting.
Yes, indeed. And as for Anthony Michael Hall, Hall suspects that he was never forgiven for turning down parts in Pretty in Pink from 1986 and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, also 86. I turned down later films as well, Some Kind of Wonderful, 1987. Not because I didn't want to work with John anymore. I loved working with him more than anyone before or since. John was obsessed with romance.
Some people are.
Yes.
Coop, this was a cool retro trek that we embarked on this week in the orchard.
Yeah.
Although John Hughes was offered the Distinguished Alumni Award from Glenbrook North High School, he refused it in reflection of his not so great memories of the school itself. Hmm. He spent a lot of time alone and used his active imagination to keep himself entertained.
Yes, much to our delight.
Indeed. And as an adolescent, John Hughes felt the need to escape his problems. This raw, relatable development for Hughes opened up in which he became an avid film fan as he found that film satisfied his need for escapism, which was good for us, the fans.
Yes, thank you very much. So, how cool is it that he took a huge personal struggle he had to, regularly face and contend with during his days coming up, and with his penchant for activating his imagination to allow for blissfully wonderful escapism, as you just shared. Lemons meet lemonade.
Wow!
I truly believe that some of our greatest nostalgia stems from similar struggles of some of these notable celebrities.
Oh, I agree, Coop. John Hughes was a great example of how important it is to never underestimate a vivid imagination. Don't let those early life experiences, especially if these were less than stellar, squash or define your dreams. This guy's warm contributions helped to shape our retro memories in cinema really like no other. He ignited the popularity of the Brat Pack, gathered the 80s teenager experience, and packaged these and other nostalgic comedic goodness all in a neatly packaged offering time and time again.
Yeah.
Wonderful feel good movies effortlessly depicting even better times back then. John Hughes knew how to showcase the total tubular 80s.
And that's it for this week's episode. To make sure that you never miss out on another second of our Carmelicious podcast, meet up with us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast fix. Bye for now, and thanks so much for listening.